Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your friendly neighborhood Coach Pruitt here with you once again with our daily YouTube video. This video is covering the information for class on the 10th and 11th of March 2021. Today is the first day of unit number 6. So, last time that we were together, we took our test over unit number 5. We are still waiting on all of the data on that. We had a few people that missed the test. So we will get that information to you guys as quickly as we can. As of this morning, any grades that were submitted are in the system, have been entered in the grade book, and anybody who hasn't turned their test in that was here has been marked as missing. You can still submit your test, but we ask you to do it before the end of the day on the day that you took it. If it wasn't done, we marked it as missing. You can see on the screen here that we have our daily class information for today, so let's look at that first. Your essential question for today: what does it mean to be an empire or imperial? So in unit number 6, we're going to start to look at how the United States of America begins to expand its influence throughout not only our own hemisphere, Monroe Doctrine, but also through other hemispheres and other parts of the world. So what we'll look at today is we'll very quickly discuss the unit number 5 test grades, very briefly discuss what we know about the test. Like I said, there's still a few people missing. So we can't cover everything. We will then take today to look at our new unit stuff. So just like we do on the first day of every unit, we'll introduce the standards. We'll talk about what the content of our unit is going to be. We'll look at our task work together and kind of briefly overview each assignment. And then we'll hopefully have maybe about 30 minutes or so at the end of class to begin working on a couple of task work assignments. You can see here that I have some important announcements. First of all, the highlighted one is the unit number 5 task work due date, which is this Friday by midnight. We're giving you guys an extra 3 or 4 days, depending on when you take it, to turn in your task work. So by this Friday, the 12th, by midnight, you have to submit your unit number 5 task work. You can send it, again, as an email. You can send it as a remind message, or you can send it as a message in Canvas, but you cannot turn it in on or in Canvas. Second announcement is that the 26th, that's a couple weeks from now, but it is an early release Friday for students and a teacher work day for us. So another half day for all of you. That's the 26th. That should be, I'm checking the schedule, an even Friday. And then spring break is getting ever closer. The first full week of April, the 5th through the 9th, we are all out of school for our spring break. And if you're like me, then you are eagerly holding on and anticipating that week off. We've got a couple of other links down here. We'll be looking at all of these today. So let's go in and look at our Canvas page. Let's go in and look at unit number 6. So remember, guys, if we go to unit number 6 in Canvas, we would need to scroll down to the second section, the U.S. History Module section. If we click on unit number 6, it will take us to the unit number 6 module. So, sorry, my Canvas is being slow. There we go. So, just as always, we have the title. So in this unit, we're going to start to look at World War I and the Great Depression. We'll actually look a little before the First World War. Now, normally this would be the part of the year where I would feel confident asking you guys what you learned last year. I know in my world history class, we spend a good bit of time on World War I or World War I. If you guys had me last year, you know you have to say it in a British accent. But we didn't get very far into this first conflict last year because we're about on almost the 1-year anniversary of the Great Shutdown, as I'm going to refer to it. When school got canceled, we thought it was going to be 2 weeks, and it ended up being quite a bit longer. So at the top here, you guys can see we have our task work. So clicking on this link will, as always, pull up a downloadable version of the task work, which you can download, save to your device, highlight, copy, do whatever you need to do with. There is, of course, a read-only version here, so you can just look at it as a reference. I'm going to pull this up in a Word doc just so it takes up more of the screen. We can see it a little better. So in this unit, we're going to look at 4 standards. We're going to look at standards 14, 15, 16, and 17. Standard number 14, we're going to look at America's evolving relationship with the world at the turn of the 20th century and start to look at America as an empire, expanding its influence elsewhere, not just on our continent or even in our hemisphere. So we'll talk about things like the Spanish-American War, the war in the Philippines, the debate over expansionism and American imperialism. We'll also look at the Roosevelt Corollary, which is going to add to the Monroe Doctrine, the creation of the Panama Canal, and the United States really getting involved in Latin and South America. Standard 15, we're going to look at the U.S. involvement in World War I or World War I. So we'll look at how the U.S. begins as a neutral country, not wanting to get involved in the war, but eventually gets pulled in due to things like unrestricted submarine warfare, the Zimmerman telegram. We'll talk about the impact of World War I domestically and how, even though there was no fighting in the United States, it still affected our country nationally. Things like the Great Migration, the Espionage Act, and then we'll talk about the 14 points, which was President Wilson's plan for peace, the League of Nations, and we'll have to see how both those things didn't work out very well at all. We will talk about how the end of standard number 16, the end of World War I, is going to lead to some very drastic changes in the United States. We'll talk about the Red Scare and immigration restriction, the 18th and 19th Amendments. Ladies, you are finally going to get the right to vote in this unit, so that is fantastic that we can finally discuss that. We will look at how mass production and overconsumption are going to start to be a factor that we're going to need to notice in the U.S. economy. We'll focus on Henry Ford and the automobile. We'll talk about American culture beginning to develop. Things like not television yet, movies, radio, unifying national forces or cultural forces that begin to unite more and more Americans. And then lastly, we get to talk about a really cool thing called the Harlem Renaissance, which was sort of like the Renaissance in world history. It was a rebirth of African American culture. Standard number 17, we will look at the Great Depression. We'll talk about how the Depression begins in 1929. We will talk about the factors that led to this Great Depression. And while I am no economist, we will make sure and just kind of hit the highlights. And then we'll talk about how President Hoover sort of gets the blame and how this is going to set the United States up to go into the 1940s and eventually World War II. So those are our standards. Here are our key terms. So in this unit, we will have key terms. Last unit, we had the ABC book. I thought about halfway doing something similar to that again, but so many people have not done their ABC book that it would be a waste of time. So we're just going to do key terms like we normally do. All right. I've got to go back and fix this, guys. I forgot to fix this, so that is my apologies. Just remember, it's the same that we always have with our key terms. You have to do your definitions, and again, we want those in your own words. And then we also have your artistic expression, right? Easiest thing to do, I think, is to find 2 clip art pictures or 2 online pictures, add them with your definition, and you're done. We will have a map activity that we will be working on. Still haven't found a good way to do an interactive like fill-in map. What I did find, though, is a national, actually an international World War I sort of map and timeline that we'll be looking at. I have, I'll show you this in a second because we're going to do it today. But I have a worksheet. You're going to use the map to kind of go through, fill in the blanks, fill in the notes for it. So a little more structure than we normally have with our maps, where it's just kind of like find information. We'll talk about expansionism. We will take some notes on American expansionism, and we will look at these 4 things: the Spanish-American War, the War in the Philippines, debates on expansion, and the Roosevelt Corollary. We'll talk about what each of those things are, why they were important, how they affected the United States. When we get to World War I, we will do a little bit of stuff to kind of recap it from a world history perspective, just because we didn't really get there last year in any world history classes. So we'll talk about mania and complete that, and that'll transition us into the First World War. We'll talk about how the United States begins as neutral and what shifts them from neutral to getting involved. We'll complete an organizer over standard number 15. Basically, we'll answer questions and kind of do our, instead of taking notes specifically, we'll use an organizer to kind of fill things out and get the content. And then we'll look at President Wilson's 14 points, which is a speech that he gave for post-world peace. And we'll do a short writing activity. We'll scaffold this, so we'll kind of help you guys out. But basically, it's an opinion-based question of, do you think it worked? Do you think that it didn't? And why? We have a standard 16 and 17 worksheet that we will be working on. We'll also use that as a study guide at some point. And then once we get to the Great Depression, we will be kind of listing out the factors that caused the Great Depression, making sure we know specifically what they were and how they affected the United States. We will look at several different parts of U.S. society that we're developing in the post-First World War era, and we will do an activity on yellow journalism. We'll talk more about yellow journalism a little later. Basically, this is like tabloids. Yellow journalism is what today would be tabloids, so woman gives birth to elephant baby sort of thing, right? You see them in the grocery store. We'll look at those later. Now, last thing that I want to do today is just very quickly go over your map assignment. Today at the end of class, we are going to give you guys some time because we just took a test yesterday. We're just introducing the new topics and standards. It's not going to be a very stressful day, but you're going to have 45 minutes of class for asynchronous independent learning time. And your two options for assignments are begin working on your key terms or begin working on your map. So right here, you can see the map assignment, interactive map. If we click on this interactive map activity, as always, there's a blue download button up top. You can download this document to your computer, then you can type on it, edit it, highlight it, whatever you need to do. Or you can copy and paste this into a blank Microsoft Word or Google Doc. No, sorry, those are the only two options. I thought there was something else, but there's not. Sorry. My bad. If you're doing it on paper, guys, that was the other option. There we go. If you're doing it, I'm sorry, it's early in the morning. If you're doing it on paper, you can, of course, set your piece of paper up to look like this, and then you can just fill it in as we go. So you can see that there are a couple of different areas. There are some general questions that we're going to look at, and then some information for you to fill out. Everything can be found on this website, and this is the link right here. It's linked. There's also a link at the bottom of your task worksheet as well. And so you can see here that this is a global view of the First World War and kind of how things were organized or set up at the beginning of the First World War. So 1914 is when the war begins. This map is basically good from 1914 to about 4 or 5 years before that. All right. So as you can see, you have some questions that you want to answer. The first one is list all the regions on the map. So if I go back to the map, you can see here, if I click on the regions view, there is the list. You can literally just fill this in. This map breaks it up a little differently. It's not just the 7 continents. Okay, it breaks up the Caribbean as its own area. Also, you'll notice that Asia is sort of broken up. It takes all of Russia and puts it as part of Europe. And also the Middle East is kind of its own thing here. Obviously, Antarctica is not here because it's not inhabitable. Okay. Second section is list all the countries that had some form of empire. So if we go to about this map, let me make sure I'm clicking on the right link. It's not that one. I don't think it's this one either. Hold on one second. There we go. Show 1914 empire. So the second thing on the map is asking us what countries had empires. And you can see here that this map is very color-coded. It's kind of difficult to see kind of the differences subtly in some of the colors. But there's a big list here at the bottom. So you just literally list all of these. You can look at them, and we'll look at those a little bit more. All right. And then following on with the map, just some basic questions about the first 2 maps. And then as you scroll down farther, it's going to ask you about the 2 sides specifically and ask you to list information. You can find those by clicking specifically on a region. So if we go back to the region view, oh, I'm sorry, clicking the wrong thing. Show region view in the top left. If I click that, and then you can click on specifically Europe. And then once you click on Europe, you can click on specifically any country. So let's just do France to start with. And then it will pull up a zoomed in version of France and then give you some basic information about France. And you can answer the questions from there. Okay, so that's your mapping assignment. Today, again, the plan is to introduce our brand new unit, go over the new content for the unit. We will be looking at the standards together, looking at our task work activities together, and then hopefully give you the last 30 to 40 minutes to work independently, starting on your key terms and your map. Should be a stressful day. If you haven't finished your test, ASAP, should have already been done, has to be done. We love you guys. We'll see you in class. Take care.